Victor Gideon was the kind of man who kept meticulous records of his own destruction, every vial logged, every subject catalogued, every decision annotated in margins so precise they read like a scientist's notebook, which is exactly what they were right up until the moment they became a confession. And the thing about Gideon that nobody really talks about is that he never lost control. Not once. Every horror he produced was deliberate, considered, chosen. That's what makes him the most unsettling figure Requiem puts in front of you. He told Grace Ashcroft, "I liberated you." But the person Victor Gideon truly liberated was himself, straight into hell. By the end of this video, you'll never see his final boss form the same way again, because what looks like a villain origin story is actually a meticulous, documented record written in his own journals, his own lab logs, his own words, of a man systematically dismantling himself and calling every single step of it progress. Let's start at the actual beginning, before Rhodes Hill, before the injections, before Grace. We're starting with a virologist in his 20s who found a god and quietly decided to spend the rest of his life becoming worthy of him. That god was Oswell Spencer, and that devotion that's where everything that followed gets born, including the thing that kills him. The Tyrant project files show a version of Gideon that the game barely lets you see. Before the stitches, before the mutations, before any of the horror, he's a true believer. Spencer's framework for human evolution was an ideology to Gideon. It was closer to scripture. You have to sit with that to understand what breaks later, because this isn't a story about science going wrong. It's a story about faith metastasizing inside a person with enough intelligence to make the faith feel rational. While Umbrella was still standing, Gideon was absorbing everything: the philosophy, the methodology, the foundational justification that some humans simply matter more than others. He took notes, he applied them, he internalized them so completely that when the Empire eventually fell, the doctrine didn't fall with it. It survived inside him. Post-2003, the Spencer Foundation records show Rhodes Hill changing hands. Gideon acquires the facility, and something in his focus clarifies. The church is gone, the god has vanished, but the convert is still standing, and he's decided he doesn't need the institution anymore. He'll finish what the institution started. That distinction matters enormously, because it separates Gideon from every other Umbrella-adjacent antagonist in the franchise. He's not trying to rebuild the company. He's not cosplaying Spencer. He genuinely understands the destination better than Spencer did, and he intends to get there himself. Umbrella was a corporation. Gideon is a man who outlived his religion and appointed himself the new high priest. Rhodes Hill becomes the monastery, the lab becomes the chapel, and the survivors filtering through his facilities become the congregation he never asked for and never respected. The Raccoon City Syndrome report is one of the most unsettling documents in Requiem's entire lore dump, not for what it reveals about the virus, for what it reveals about Gideon's reaction to it. Latent T-virus in long-term raccoon survivors, dormant, stable, somehow coexisting with human cognition in ways that directly contradicted everything Umbrella's own research had predicted. 171 test subjects. The lab logs from Rhodes Hill are specific. 171 people entered that facility and were systematically consumed by his need to isolate the mutation pathway, the precise biological chain that allowed the T-virus to coexist rather than erase human intelligence. He's not chaotic about it. That's the part that sticks. Methodical, precise, patient. Each failure narrows the parameter. Each loss refines the hypothesis. And slowly, through work that only makes sense from inside the moral framework he built for himself, the direction becomes clear. Not in them, in where they're pointing. A Tyrant-class organism that doesn't lose its mind. That was the dream. The dream became the plan became a decision, and the decision, once made, cannot be unmade. Here's where it gets genuinely unsettling, because up to this point, Gideon is readable. Obsessive scientist, institutional trauma, self-experiments, goes full BOW. Tragic but legible, classic RE villain geometry. But the Elpis project files reframe everything before them.
Gideon wasn't chasing Tyrant-class evolution in isolation. He was chasing Spencer's ghost, specifically something Spencer had theorized under the name Elpis, and Gideon believed completely and without room for doubt that Elpis was the God virus, the final formula, the end state of what human evolution could become through the virus if applied to the right subject in the right conditions. He thought he was completing Spencer's masterwork. He thought he was the answer to the questions Spencer had spent his life asking. Grace Ashcroft becomes central here because of what her blood sample data shows. Her genetic profile carries a specific configuration that Gideon's analysis identifies as a key, not a weapon, not a cure, a key to unlocking the final mutation stage in an already infected host. In Gideon's logic, Grace isn't a person he's exploiting. She's the variable Spencer never had access to. He's not kidnapping a daughter. He's acquiring the last missing piece of the most important experiment in human history. That's the horrifying coherence of his worldview, and it only holds together if Elpis is what he thinks it is. But Spencer never wanted evolution. That's the line, that's the floor falling away, because what the post-game lore documents and the ARC facility logs piece together when you let the fragments assemble is a picture of Spencer's actual Elpis intent that has almost nothing to do with transcendence. Spencer's God aspiration was never about lifting humanity, it was about selecting who survived. Evolution as a culling mechanism, Elpis as a leash, not a ladder. Spencer wanted to be the one holding the leash. That was the whole design. Gideon spent his entire adult life completing an assignment that was never about what he thought it was about. The idol had a completely different God in mind. And the moment that truth becomes undeniable, the moment the files show him what Spencer actually built versus what he was told to believe, something in Gideon doesn't just break, it inverts.
Decapitating Xeno after the Elpis revelation, ARC facility logs if you want to verify it isn't a tantrum, it's execution. The last witness to the delusion removed. And then the turn that changes the shape of everything. Instead of releasing the antiviral and halting what he started, Gideon weaponizes it. Not as evolution, as anarchy. If the system that produced Spencer, that produced Umbrella, that produced the entire architecture of who gets to be considered worthy, if that system is a lie built on a lie, then the answer isn't reform, the answer is combustion. Let whatever survives sort itself out. He became the very BOW he spent 30 years worshiping, not as metaphor, literally. The final sequence? 2 phases. The giant mutation captured in the boss cutscene with a level of biological specificity that I think Requiem trusts you to sit with, is the parasite winning the argument. And here's what I genuinely cannot stop thinking about. The modified strain retained his intelligence. He's still in there. Somewhere inside that mutation, Victor Gideon is fully conscious, fully present, watching himself become the endpoint of everything he's studied, documented, and chose. The Elpis truth didn't just take his purpose, it took the identity his purpose had been holding up. And a man with no identity left, who already chose to become a host, who already decided the world deserves what's coming, that man doesn't fight the mutation. He lets it finish. That's not a villain dying, that's a designed ending. The most elaborate, the most documented, the most deliberately constructed death in the entire franchise. What makes Gideon hit different from every other RE antagonist is that he was never crashing out, never reactive, always methodical, always deliberate, every step of the way. The madness was load-bearing. It supported every choice, which means every move toward his own destruction felt from within his framework like progress. He wasn't losing his mind. He thought he was finally finding it. Some evolutions should never happen. That's what Requiem keeps saying in every direction, not because the science is impossible, because the people who chase it always become the proof of their own hypothesis, not in the way they intended, in the way that costs everything they had and everything they were. Victor Gideon didn't fail to become something greater. He succeeded in becoming exactly what he'd been building toward for 30 years.
and it turned out that destination was a grave wearing a god's face. So that's it for today. Gideon's lore runs deeper than any single playthrough can catch, and the Ark documents are still hiding things we haven't fully reconstructed, so stay locked in for that one. See you in the next one. Until then, stay informed, stay excited.